Origin Gens, welcome to CG Reaction. This is Berlin Airlift. The Cold War begins. Extra history by the channel Extra Credits. Yeah, tension between the Soviet Union and the former World War II allies escalated into hostile blockade of Berlin. All sides wanted to avoid another war, but the United States, Great Britain, and the France refused to bend to Stalin's pressure. They came up with daring plan to supply Berlin by. Oh, okay, yeah, this is that. So this is where Cold War begins. I wanted to react to some, good Cold War series, with, by good channel like Extra Credits. I don't think this is a series, it's just one video thing, but there could be a series. Is there a series on Cold War by this channel? I don't know. So yeah, but this is gonna be fun. Yeah, I remember watching, reacting to some video in the past where, somebody just, just thought of it like, why not just supply it with the planes? I mean, they can't blockade that. That way there is no war because there is no direct conflict or anything like that, and supply is still there, so they don't have to run away and leave Berlin. I guess that would have made sure the Soviets gets entire Berlin. So yeah, remember people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like, subscribe, check out the reaction. There's a link in the description. Check out the cars of the playlists like history, overseas production, internet students, CGP great here. So yeah, let's go this one.
June 1948, the Oval Office. The cabinet gathers for a conference with President Truman. 4 days prior, the Soviet Union blockaded the American, British, and French-occupied sectors of Berlin. With the divided city located 100 miles inside the Soviet-controlled zone of East Germany, there's no way for American food and fuel, the lifeline of its undernourished populace, to get through. The city only has 36 days worth of food remaining, and only 45 days of coal. Allied troops...
Hold up, this is what I'm thinking, right? When the World War II ended and the Allied forces, I guess, took over Germany and everything, why didn't Britain, France, and USA thought, this is really bad, bad strategy. So if you're going to take this place, let's take some place in here too, in whatever treaty they signed with Russia, Soviet Union, whatever. Let's take this place too. Otherwise, this is an issue or something like that. Because after Germany fell, every Allied forces, Russia and Soviet Union and every other Allied forces took places, right, by some kind of a treaty or something. So this feels like a really bad plan. Why didn't they take some places where they know the supply line can be intact and we are not surrounded by Soviets or something?
Inside the Soviet-controlled zone of East Germany, there's no way for American food and fuel, the lifeline of its undernourished populace, to get through. The city only has 36 days worth of food remaining, and only 45 days of coal. Allied troops are surrounded, outnumbered 62-1. The cabinet lays out 3 options. 1. American forces could withdraw, but that would signal that Western democracies are unable to counter Soviet aggression. 2. They could stay in Berlin until the starving population
after throwing nuclear bombs at Japan and so flexing in the world stage, them running away, that would never happen. US running away at this point would never happen.
Forces them out and accept Soviet rule out of desperation. Or 3. They could send an armed convoy to open the roads, but that would start another world war. They advised Truman to withdraw. Truman says, "We stay in Berlin, period."
Look, if somebody hadn't thought of like, let's fly supply in, and people were still like, we can't run away, what should we do? I think there would have been a conflict, because they would have just played the card like, they are blockading, so in a way they are the one who's showing aggression, so we have to fight back or something like that. That's what would have happened.
You remember that series on Hiawatha we did a while back? Those episodes were sponsored by the folks at Dominations, and we enjoyed doing those so much that when they said, hey, we're about to introduce the Cold War era into our game, you want to do some episodes about that? Our answer was, heck yeah, we do. So today we are going to talk about the Berlin Airlift, an event that not only set off the Cold War, but established how it would be fought. You see, after Germany's surrender in World War II, the Allies divided Germany into 4 occupation zones, the Soviets in the east, and the Americans, British, and French in the west, and Berlin, though it lay in the Soviet zone, was divided as well. The problem was that the Allies had 2 competing, irreconcilable visions for Germany. The Soviets had suffered 2 German invasions in the span of 30 years. They wanted this country broken and subordinate, so it could never threaten Russia again. They also wanted it to function as a buffer.
Right now, if somebody hears that, like, breaking up Germany. What? That feels like a bit radical or something like that. But no, it's really not. Before World War One, it was just few decades when Germany became a thing. Before that, it was Prussia. Bismarck made Germany a proper state. So, after World War One and World War Two, Soviets thinking, screw this, let's break up Germany again. This was a bad idea or something like that. Their mentality is that. That's not far-fetched to think, right? Especially at the time where, Ottoman Empire were broken apart. So why not Germany? That's probably what their mentality was.
Zone to keep the Western powers at bay. In the end, Stalin's goal was a communist puppet state in Germany and the Allies out of Berlin. But America and Britain believed that Nazi extremism had arisen due to the Great Depression, and that the best chance for a peaceful Europe was a prosperous democratic Germany. They also hoped that it would be a...
Oh yeah, that is true, right? I mean, after World War One, all the treaties and things that were signed, really put pressure on the Germany. After the Great Depression, that was the last straw. So, by now they know that if we put a heavy treaties on Germany, that's not going to work. They'll come back just like they did in the World War II. They'll come back even more stronger because, Prussia, Germany, they are really powerful in military side, I guess. So they are thinking like, okay, let's try another approach. Let's make sure that they prosper as a democratic country. Let's help them in that direction. So at least we ensure that, they are prosperous, they are democratic, so nobody's going to rise up or something.
Bulwark against Soviet expansionism. So this joint occupation effort was doomed to failure from the outset. But the final showdown came over currency. Berlin was in economic ruin. Allied bombing had destroyed most of its industrial foundation, and even 3 years after the war, most Berliners lived in the basements of shattered buildings. Some were living on just 900 calories a day. The biggest problem was the value of German currency, which was so low that a loaf of bread often cost an entire paycheck. The city's real currency at this point was American cigarettes, and
imagine that, German people, right? There was a guy whose son rose up, a fascist guy like Nazi, Hitler, with all these Nazism ideas. At the time, people didn't realize how serious, his ideas were, so, and then he came like, okay, you know what? I'm going to give all of you a car, a people's car, Volkswagen, people's car. Everybody needs to pitch in some money here and there. And, we'll give you a car. So everybody worked hard and gave money thinking we were going to get a car. They didn't get a car. They got a massive army to Nazis. Then they attacked, World War II happened, then World War II finished. In then what happened, those same people who paid money for the car, which Hitler used to, wage war everywhere, now they are just living, in the basements, living on 900 calories a day. So how effed up the scenario is for the German people at that time. This is just ridiculous.
Most civilians survived by a combination of black market, food aid, and prostitution. The Allies made an attempt at currency reform, but this attempt failed when the Soviets sabotaged the effort by printing billions of extra notes. By 1948, the frustrated Western powers were secretly planning to introduce a new currency, the Deutschmark, and met behind Stalin's back to discuss forming a West German state. The Soviets found out about this, and in protest, abandoned the Four-Power Council. In response, the Western Allies released the new currency, and Stalin had his pretext. On June 23rd, Soviet troops encircled Berlin, blockading the road and rail line the Allies had been using to supply the city. The city's power station, located in the Soviet sector, cut electricity. The Berlin blockade had begun, and Truman had to choose between retreat or war. But there was another possibility. The Soviets had interrupted traffic to Berlin before, months earlier, but the Allies had continued supplying their troops via air. Truman wondered whether a similar airlift could supply all of Berlin. After all, the only way you can stop a plane is to shoot at it, which would be an act of war.
Yeah.
American generals dismissed this idea as impossible. But the Royal Air Force thought different. After years of war shortages, the British were experts in rationing, and they ran the numbers. They concluded...
All the Americans are like, what a preposterous idea. That was a stupid idea. The British Air Force there. Yeah, we can do it. Yeah, we've been doing that for a long time. We can definitely do it.
That it would take 4,000 tons of food and fuel per day to keep Berlin from collapsing. But to move that much cargo in C-47 transports would mean over 1,300 flights every 24 hours.
Whoa.
And only the Americans had that capacity. Under pressure from Truman, the U.S. generals agreed to try. The first flight began on June 26th.
What pressure? He's the president. He can just order them, like, do that, the end.
Despite Soviet threats, the anti-aircraft guns stayed silent. They had called Stalin's bluff. But the airlift didn't have enough planes or crews. The Air Force tried bringing in air wings from as far away as Guam, but it still wasn't enough. 2 weeks in, the airlift was only delivering 1,000 tons per day, a quarter of what they needed. And conditions were perilous. The American airport at Tempelhof was a grass field that needed to be patched between landings. An apartment block stood directly on the approach path, its roof just 17 feet below the landing gear. And those C-47s were old leftovers from the war. Coal and flour dust, both of which were explosive, by the way, filled the plane's cargo holds. The 24-hour nature of this operation strained both the airmen and their antiquated planes.
Damn.
And all the while, Soviet Yak fighters buzzed the transports, keeping the pressure on. But despite the shortfall on the cargo quota, the airlift spurred a wave of enthusiasm. Across Europe, people set aside wartime grudges in an effort to keep Berlin from starving. Blitz survivors in London sent care packages to Berlin. Many RAF mechanics didn't even wait to be called up. They just grabbed their toolboxes and hitched a flight to Hamburg. Germans, previously hostile to the pilots who had leveled their cities, instead began plying Allied airmen with beer. It was a chaotic cowboy operation. So Washington dispatched
when you see that there is no hope everywhere, this is just going into, like, after World War I, they already know, how, pressure can be put on Germany. After World War II, it was even worse, right? And they were starving, so there was no hope anywhere. People were just, getting by every day. Then they realized, wait a minute, there's a hope there. They're trying to get us food by, planes and things. So of course, there's going to be, real enthusiasm, like, yeah, let's help them or something.
A man to tame it. General William Tunner was a taciturn man who loved him some charts. During the war, he had commanded an airlift that flew supplies over the Himalayas and into occupied China. Now, he was given the objective of delivering 4,000 tons per day. First thing first, he created a tight schedule. Planes would take off and land at precise 3-minute intervals, and the flights would stack at 5 altitudes, maximizing the number of planes in the air. When the crews landed, they'd have 30 minutes to unload before taking off again.
He's gonna micromanage
Tunner
this
also
shit.
enforced maintenance checks, brought in fresh U.S. Navy pilots, and replaced the C-47s with larger capacity C-54s. To make up for the ground crew shortage, he hired Germans to unload cargo and patch runways. And after translating the maintenance manuals, he assigned former Luftwaffe mechanics to repair planes. Men who had been shooting at each other only
Big planes anyway. Wait a minute, there was a Fallout reference?
3 years before, now worked side by side. Tunner's shakeup worked. On August 12th, the airlift reached its target for the first time, 4,500 tons. Then, Tunner discovered that one of his pilots, Gale Halvorsen, had been making unauthorized cargo drops. Every time Halvorsen came in for a landing, he would drop off little handkerchief parachutes containing parcels of candy to the children that gathered near the runway. Berliners loved it, and Tunner saw the PR potential. He ordered the candy drops expanded and sent Halvorsen on a press tour back home.
Damn.
The airlift, a humanitarian effort without traditional military heroes, finally had a public face. And that PR victory was good news because winter was coming. The Soviets had been stalling diplomatically for exactly this reason. Surely deteriorating weather would put a stop to this airlift for good. Fog came in heavy that season. At times, it lay so thick on the runways that ground crews had to crawl for fear of walking into an unseen propeller. Aircraft landed in zero visibility with ice.
Oh my god, imagine that scenario where you have to crawl because you can't see anything. It's, snowing everywhere. There could be a propeller coming. Oh shit. First of all, I'm just imagining being there, gigantic plane coming with the propellers that could cut you down anytime. That is just ridiculous, man.
Iced up engines. They collided in midair. They smashed into mountain ranges. Exhausted pilots fell asleep at the stick. Meteorologists, circling in B-29s, alerted ground control of 15-minute breaks in the weather that would allow flights to get through. And somehow, they did. On New Year's Eve, 1948, Allied forces delivered over 6,000 tons,
Damn.
a new record. And as winter passed and the weather began to let up, the airlift began delivering more supplies than the city had ever received by rail. This success emboldened anti-Soviet politicians within Berlin. In September, Ernst Reuter, elected mayor in 1947 but blocked from taking his seat by the Soviets, gave a fiery speech before a crowd of 300,000 Berliners, imploring the world not to abandon the city to totalitarianism. That December, he won the mayor's office, appearing around the world as the face of Free Berlin. In retaliation, the Soviets installed their own communist city government in East Berlin. Stalin's strategy had backfired. Instead of preventing a West German state, he had fueled it. Far from revealing Allied weaknesses, he had allowed them to take the moral high ground, demonstrating their commitment and turning Germans from an occupied people into comrades. And the blockade was damaging East Berlin's economy. Its factories couldn't function without goods from the western sector. The Soviets had been outmaneuvered. On May 12, 1949, Soviet soldiers removed the roadblocks and allowed the first American supply convoy to pass into Berlin.
Look at that. One side tried to suppress everybody, tried to starve everybody, lost because other side was, was really had a genius ideas, flew in supplies and had a, real people support because they were actually trying to help people.
That road would never close again. In 15 months of operation, the Airlift delivered over 2.4 million tons of food and fuel, saving Berlin from famine. 79 Allied personnel and German civilians lost their lives to the effort, and the world would never be the same. Stalin's willingness to starve civilians marked a turning point, uniting Western Europe in a coalition to contain Soviet influence. A month before the end of the blockade, this new alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was formally signed into being. And within weeks, West Germany formally became its own country, followed by communist East Germany. Europe was divided in half, and 2 months later, the Soviets tested their first atomic bomb. It was the beginning of a new kind of war, one of political influence, fought by great powers over proxy states. A war of threat and restraint, where governments tested just how far they could push the other without starting a full-scale conflict. But the Soviets and the Americans would never again square off as directly as they did during the Airlift. When nuclear armament is in play, that is just not the kind of gamble you take.
Yeah.
Thanks again to our friends at Dominations for sponsoring this episode.
Damn, that was something, right? I mean, after World War II, the literal two ideas got separated. Soviet Union obviously having the same old style ideas of communism and suppressing Germany, while other side is like, okay, you know what, enough of rinse and repeat kind of process. This is not working. There is no point of punishing Germany in any way. It's best to make sure that they become more prosperous democratic country, so World War III doesn't happen, just like World War II happened because of World War I and all the treaties after that. So this is how the Cold War began. The ideas got split between the Soviet Union and all other allied forces. That was something. But there was a grave mistake by them, right? When they decided to split Germany into who's going to take which power. When the France, UK, US decided to take Berlin and their side, then gave all the surrounding areas to Soviet Union. That was a bit weird thing. They should have kept a patch. They gave them clear way. Otherwise, this was inevitable. So yeah. I hope there is a more detailed Cold War series from this channel. If there is not, I guess comment down which other channel has great Cold War series. I really want to react to that. Alright people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the reaction, there's a link in the description. Check out the cast, please check out the end cards, and I'll see you next time.